Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Timely Action Hour podcast. This is the show where we talk about everything from Spider-Man to The Lord of the Rings and everything in between. I'm your host, Aiden. This is episode 18, the top 10 Spider-Man villains in my opinion. So, the list started as just a way for me to talk about some of my favorite comic book villains, specifically those who fight Spider-Man. And if you know me, you know that Spider-Man is my favorite comic book character. He's tied, actually, with both Batman and Superman, because I love all three of them so much, I had to put them all on my at the top of my list as my favorite superheroes. So, this list goes from number 10 being the worst of the best to number 1 being the best of all time, in my opinion. So, at number 10, let's just start this off. At number 10, I have Venom. Now, the reason why I have him at number 10 is because he loves to fuck with Spider-Man, and he knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he uses this to his advantage by, tormenting him when he's at home or when he is just out and about. And, he just does what he can to make Spider-Man's life miserable. Now, the alien costume, or as it was most commonly known as the symbiote, loves Peter. It has its own way of loving him romantically, and it wanted to have a relationship with Peter, and then he rejected it, and so then it went on to Eddie Brock, who was a disgraced journalist, and they bonded and created the villain Venom. So the reason why I have Venom at the bottom of this list is because Brock's motivation for hating Spider-Man and Peter Parker is so weak, it's funny, really. So, if you've only seen the movies or the television shows and you have not read the comics, then this might come as a bit of a shock to you, but, so Eddie Brock worked, I think, for the Daily Globe. It was a rival newspaper to the Daily Bugle, and he was writing this story about this character known as the Sin Eater, who was the villain of this story called The Death of Jean DeWolf, and you can check out my review of that comic book on my YouTube channel, the National Timely Action Hour. And so essentially, he received false evidence that Flash Thompson, Peter Parker's former bully turned friend, he was the Sin Eater according to this evidence, and so he wrote the story and his editor published it in the paper, and then Spider-Man proved that that was indeed false, and so Brock was fired, and that's why he hates Spider-Man. He hates him because he didn't fact check. So, great journalistic integrity right there, Eddie. There's no fault of your own there, buddy. But anyway, so then the suit bonded with him, and then they became Venom. Again, very weak motivation. The suit, I understand. The suit loves Peter and wants to get back to him, but Oh, also, I forgot. Compounded by his failure as a journalist, Brock was diagnosed with some form of cancer. I don't remember exactly what it was. But anyway, he was terminally ill, and he was, trying to curb it by exercising, so that's how he got jacked. And, he was already taller than Peter Parker, but now he's, muscular. Got that Lou Ferrigno sort of look going. And, but it wasn't working. It was, just delaying the inevitable. And so he went to this church, and he brought a gun with him because he wanted to kill himself, and he was going to the church to beg God for forgiveness for committing suicide. And that was the same church where Spider-Man went to, use the bell tower to get the suit off of him, and then that's how it got on Brock. And so it was later revealed that the symbiote was curing Brock of the cancer. So, yeah, that's why Eddie wants the suit to stay on him. Alright, so number 9, my 9th favorite Spider-Man villain is the Sandman. So, the Sandman, aka William Baker, aka Flint Marko, he is basically OP. He can change his shape and his body, using the sand molecules, and he can change shapes, he can do all these incredible things. And, he's just it's interesting. He's an interesting character because in the late 1980s and early 1990s, he went through a redemption arc. But then Dr. Octopus is like, no, you're a villain, so get back on the Sinister Six. And he's like, okay. But, yeah, he's a classic Ditko creation, and I just really think he's cool. And, yeah, the movie, Spider-Man 3, that movie was a dumpster fire, but because of Avi Arad, and I don't like him. But, the movie wasn't too terrible when it came to adapting the Sandman on film. But, yeah. Then we have number 8 is the Lizard. He's very strong and sometimes smart, depending on who's writing it, because sometimes people have it so that, it's savage and doesn't have cognitive thought. It's just primitive. But then sometimes they're like, no, Dr. Connors still has control, and, he retains his intelligence. And then there's the whole pathos of him being friends with Spider-Man, because when Spider-Man first met the Lizard, he was this savage beast in Florida, and Peter went on assignment, I think, to Orlando for the Bugle or whatever, and that's how he ended up in Florida. And then he found out about the Lizard, and then he fought the Lizard, and then he found out it was Dr. Connors, and he tried to help him, and yada yada yada. And then they became friends. And then, so, there's the pathos of him being friends with Dr. Connors and wanting to help him, and also trying to maintain his privacy and not telling the papers or the police who the Lizard is. And so, there's a whole unique sort of story with him. But I think he's cool. That's why I put him on here. Plus, he's a classic villain, and I love the classic villains for the most part. So then at number 7, I have Mysterio. And Mysterio uses movie magic to confuse and disorient Spider-Man. And, ultimately, Spider-Man always uses his spider sense to figure out what's going on, and then he pummels Mysterio. But he's a cool character. He's been in some good stories, and I love his look. And it's just a cool idea of this man who was in special effects in the movies, and then he turns to villainy and uses his skills as a technician and as a film production crew member. He uses that to steal and fight Spider-Man. I just think he's really cool. Then at number 6, I have the Hobgoblin. He is just basically the Green Goblin, but sane. He's cunning, he's ruthless, he's got cool technology, he's got, good gadgets. And yeah, Hobgoblin is really cool. I really like him. He was created by John Romita Jr. in the 80s, and he has a really cool design. The colors are nice. I just really like the Hobgoblin. And then at number 5, I have the Chameleon, the OG villain. He first appeared in The Amazing Spider Man #1, which was Spider Man's second appearance and the start of his own solo series. And the Chameleon is a really good fighter. He's a master of disguise. Originally, he was a spy for the KGB, but then, after the Soviet Union fell, they couldn't have him be working for the KGB. So then they said he's just a spy for the Russian government, which is, what he was, but, different nomenclature and different organizations. And, yeah, he's just a really cool character. He's Craven the Hunter's half-brother. And, yeah, I just really like the Chameleon. Spider-Man always has to use his wits to defeat him and his spider sense, which is how he beat him in their first match. But, he just keeps on using that to defeat him. Then at number 4, I have the Kingpin. And the Kingpin controls the underworld. He runs a vast criminal empire that spans the entire globe, but his base of operations is in New York City because it's Marvel Comics. Everyone's based in New York City, barring a few minor exceptions. But, yeah, he's a really cool character. He's very strong and smart. He might not look necessarily intimidating, but he is a very tall man. And underneath all of his body fat is muscle, because there are various occasions where we see him exercising, and he's just got a six-pack under all that blubber. But, he's a really cool character. I like him. He's got this cool cane that shoots a laser beam. And most people know him as a villain for Daredevil, but Kingpin first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 50 from 1965. Amazing Spider-Man 50 from 1965. And, he was a foe for Spider-Man, and he fought Spider-Man many, many times, and still does. But then in, the early 80s, when Frank Miller was writing Daredevil, he's like, hey, you don't really use the Kingpin, so can I have him fight Daredevil? And they're like, sure. And then people associated him with Daredevil, but even though he's a Spider-Man villain. And, yeah. Then at number 3, we have Craven the Hunter. So Craven the Hunter is a very interesting character. He's, a founding member of the Sinister Six, and he's one of the classic Ditko era villains. And, he's got a really cool look, in my opinion. And, he's got a lot of cool skills. He's a very skilled hunter. He's proficient in various different weapons, like rifles, spears, bows and arrows, etc., slings, etc., etc. But it wasn't until the 1980s when he became a very sinister threat, and pun intended, but he became much more of a threat and much more realized as a character in the 80s. In this story called Craven's Last Hunt, written by J.M. DeMatteis and drawn by Mike Zeck. And you can check out my review of that. It's a phenomenal story. The artwork is superb. The writing is fantastic. I absolutely adore that story. And, yeah. So Craven relentlessly hunts Spider-Man using his impressive skills. And he uses blowguns, with poison-tipped darts and stuff. And he puts up quite a bit of a challenge for Spidey. and that's why I really like him. Then at number 2, I have Dr. Octopus. Now, I was really very close to putting him at number 1, but I'm pretty sure you can guess who just narrowly beat him. But Dr. Octopus matches Spider-Man's intelligence and is actually a little smarter than Peter. But, then again, with age comes experience, and he's older than Peter by maybe a couple of decades. Well, more than a couple. But anyway, yeah, so he's a very intelligent, very cunning and ruthless man. His arms are a very difficult challenge for Spider-Man. So he was this nuclear physicist, and he was working with some dangerous chemicals, and he built this apparatus with the 4 metallic tentacles, and he uses that to manipulate the chemicals behind this screen. But then there was an accident in his laboratory, and there was an explosion, and that crafted the arms to him. And so he, uses that to become less of a weakling in his own eyes, because, later on we see much more pathos with him, and expanding on his origin story, where, he was this sort of pathetic man, but he was very brilliant, and he was a well-respected scientist, except for when they nicknamed him Dr. Octopus as a, mean joke because of his arms. But anyway, he was still a respected scientist in his field, but then, he got into the accident, and then he decided to become a villain, and he became one of Spider-Man's greatest villains, forming the Sinister Six. And he's just a really, really cool character. His design is awesome. And also, he murdered a father figure in Peter's life. So, in the 70s, there was this... So, Peter Parker dated this woman named Gwen Stacy. And she was created by Lee and Ditko back in the 60s. And then, she was not really interesting, but she was a character, and Peter liked her, and she liked Peter. And then they dated. And so then, and then we reveal that her father, George, is a captain in the New York City Police Department. So then, there's this one story where Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man are fighting on a rooftop, and Doc Ock extends one of his mechanical arms to attack Spider-Man. He dodges. It knocks over a chimney, and then it falls down onto the street, and George Stacy, Gwen's father, being a police captain, is there, making sure, just being on the scene. And so he sees that this debris is going to crush this little boy. So then he jumps and pushes the boy out of the way, and then he gets crushed by it. And so, throughout the years, George was established as, a paternal figure for Peter. He was obviously his girlfriend's father, but he was a good guy. And he was one of the few police officers who actually liked Spider-Man. And then when he was dying, he revealed to Peter that he knew that he was Spider-Man. And so he's like, oh my goodness, this man I respected, who is the father of the woman that I love, is murdered by one of my greatest enemies. And I sort of shoulder responsibility because I ducked out of the way, and because of that, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, it just added a lot more gravitas to the stories and to the situation. So, Dr. Octopus is definitely one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. And then we go on to number 1, and I'm sure you've already guessed it, but it is, in fact, the Green Goblin. And, the Green Goblin has fucked with Spider-Man the most out of all of his villains. He murdered Gwen Stacy. He figured out... This was after he figured out that Spider-Man was Peter Parker, who was a friend of his son, Harry Osborn, because Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin. Spoiler alert, he has sort of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of mental illness going on. There's a lot of pathos there. Usually what happens is he fights Spider-Man, and then he gets, amnesia, then he remembers that he puts on the suit again, yada, yada, yada. And then he murdered Gwen, and then he has also fucked with Mary Jane, Aunt May, everyone really that Spider-Man cares about. And he's just a really good villain. He has an awesome design. He's batshit insane. He has these cool weapons. He is an interesting character. So yeah, I just really, really like the Green Goblin. He's my favorite Spider-Man villain. Now, you are free to disagree with me on any of these picks or all of them if you so choose. That's the beauty of free will and free speech, but, these are just my personal opinions. So I hope that you enjoyed listening to me ramble on about some fictional characters that I enjoy reading about. But, so thank you for listening. I had a fun time making this and placing. It was a little difficult placing the characters where I placed them, but eventually I got to the point where I'm like, okay, this is where this person goes. This is where this person goes. But if you're new to this podcast, please subscribe and check out some of my other episodes. I do a lot of character studies and lists of favorite characters or concepts. I also talk about the history of comic books, and you can also check out my YouTube channel where I review comic books and movies and video games related to that. I talk about The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, comic books, comic book TV shows and video games and movies, or just regular video games. All sorts of nerdy things that I enjoy. And I also talk about Star Trek. And so please subscribe to my podcast and my YouTube channel. And you can also check out my Facebook page, facebook.com/National Timely, where you can get updates and can send me messages and just general information about my podcast and YouTube channel. You can also go to the nationaltimelyactionhour.com, my official website. You can also follow me on twitter.com/DABUDDHA99. And you can also send me as little as $3 each month or a custom amount on patreon.com/Aidan Vaughn. That is AIDANVAUGHAN. No spaces, no capital letters. And on Patreon, you can get early access to videos and episodes of the podcast. You can also vote on polls, send me a message, or get access to my original writing projects, and all sorts of goodies. You can also order merchandise like a t-shirt or a coffee mug with my channel's logo on it. And I would like to thank those who do support me. You guys are terrific, and I am very appreciative of you. And I'm just very appreciative of those who listen to this podcast and watch my videos on YouTube. You guys are amazing. So thank you so much for joining me here today. I sincerely hope that you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for watching. Listening. Bye.